All right, guys, our favorite time of the week again. We're going to get to answer a few of your questions. Saagar, what's up first?
Number 1, Adrian Enriquez. The future of presidential debates. The Democratic and Republican Party have a bipartisan monopoly on the presidential debates. How they're televised, when they're televised, where reporters can ask questions. It's all very undemocratic, restricting voices and choices. While mainstream media is fading away, it still dominates viewership in terms of presidential debates. That being said, my question to both of you is, do you think it's possible that Rogan hosting presidential debates could upset the system or challenge the status quo of future presidential debates? I don't think Rogan will ever host one. I don't know if you remember this. A couple of months ago, the Republican Party pulled out of the Commission on Presidential Debates.
That's right.
Which we didn't cover as much at the time, but it will come back to be a very significant event. I think it's great. I hate the Commission. It's sponsored by all of these corporates. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's what it is. It's a cartel between the mainstream outlets and the
mainstream journalists.
Parties.
Right.
And it keeps out. First of all, I mean, it allows them to set all the rules for who gets to be on the stage and how it's going to be conducted and which journos get access to these people and all of that. And it creates ultimately a very limiting discussion, as we've seen. I mean, we talked a lot of times about how Andrew Yang's best moment was when he was called out, just like the theater, like we're all standing up here with makeup on. And the way that they manipulated the rules to keep people, like specifically, they worked hard to keep Mike Gravel off the stage. Yes. Remember that? So I'm all for sort of like breaking up that cartel and making it much more open. Now, I agree with our friend Irami that there should be requirements that not just presidential candidates, but that all candidates have to face public debates and public questioning as a requirement of, putting themselves out for election. Like, you have to hold yourself out to the public and be subjected to questioning. So I am for more debates in more formats with more people, Joe Rogan or whoever else. I think that would be very beneficial for
democracy. I was just looking back. The Commission on Presidential Debates is a modern phenomenon. It was created in 1988. Before that, in 76, in 80, and in 84, the debates were sponsored by the League of Women's Voters. And before that, it was just TV stations. I think that's great. I mean, I remember there was that famous moment where Reagan is like, "With respect, sir, I'm paying for this microphone." I think it was like against George W. Bush. But anyway, the candidates themselves would come together and they would organize debates. I think good. I think these are good things. We should have more debates, more often debates. The format should be totally up for grabs. If the candidates agree to it, awesome. Let's just get to it. I mean, the current commission, as we saw with the Chris Wallace and the vetting of the so-called, they were like, "We picked a black woman." I'm like, I don't care who you pick. I want it to be somebody who's actually good. That it shouldn't come down to identitarian
Usually
concerns.
The questions that are the best are the ones when they actually have it come from the audience. Those are almost always the ones that are ultimately the best.
Absolutely. And they always lead to breakout moments. That's when Bush weirdly, when Gore stepped forward towards W. Bush, and that's when Clinton demolished George H.W. Bush and he checked his watch. That was a big thing. That was actually the debate when Romney kind of stumbled, the second debate, 2012. I would say that was one of Trump's better moments, actually. And some of the time when people would press, whenever Hillary got pressed in 2016, I completely agree with you. The second debate, which is the open town hall debate, is always actually the best one. Look, these things don't actually matter. I mean, we have reams of evidence at this point that presidential debates have almost no impact on the actual vote and in terms of changing people's minds. But that doesn't mean that they're not important, from a transparency perspective.
Yeah, well, that's true too. Once, one of these people gets elected, then you have more on record of what they promised
here's what
to
you said
do. Here's what you said.
Yeah.
Here's what you said your stance was. And sometimes just being asked the right question can in fact be very revealing and, create public pressure in a certain direction. So anyway, I'm all for it. Make it more democratic, more venues, longer format, democratize who gets to actually ask the questions. Because, of course, elite journalists overwhelmingly come from elite classes. These are all Harvard, Princeton, Yale, whatever. I think that's one of the big downfalls of journalism today, actually, is just what a monoclass it ultimately represents.
They're also just bad at their jobs. You remember how many times in the healthcare debates, of the Democratic primary. They asked the same question on
Yes.
healthcare 25
Over
times.
and over and over
I'm like,
again.
I don't care. I know the answer. I can repeat the talking points of each person.
Yeah.
Ask something else.
And the questions would always push from like a pro-corporate point of view, rather than ever making anyone justify, like, for example, the millions of people who go without health insurance, or the fact that we're the only rich nation that doesn't have everyone covered. It was always from the question of, well, what if people have to change their plans? Okay, that's fine. Ask the question. Do we need it every single debate and never like anyone advocating for the people that are currently uninsured who would dramatically benefit from this? Anyway.
Whatever.
Okay, number 2. Russell Glorioso. Great name.
Great name, yeah.
Are cryptocurrency and NFTs scams? Saagar. Krystal and Saagar. I'm currently a resident in Miami. I can't help but notice the city and mayor's infatuation with attracting crypto bros. That guy's a real character, by the way.
Suarez.
To become the crypto capital of the world. Can't help but think that the tactics crypto and NFT proponents leverage are particularly delusional and slimy. Do you think the crypto craze is just that, crazy speculation with a hefty dose of predatory scammers, or does this represent a real promise for the future of finance? By the way, I'm a huge fan of the show. Would love to see you both in South Florida. It is wonderful here. Would
soon.
love to be there.
I love
Miami. I'm not a big fan of Florida overall. Miami's great.
I love Miami. It literally is like
Miami
visiting
is
another country.
Yeah, I like that.
It's
Miami
awesome.
too.
I love that. I'll walk into a place, I'm like, wow, nobody here speaks English. It's wild. And it's like the food is so good.
It's totally different vibes than anywhere else in America.
It really
I
is
do really enjoy
such
it.
a unique city. Okay, so about crypto and NFT. I'm not going to say that there aren't a lot of scammers in the space. I would say some 99%. But I do think the underlying technology is important. I mean, the ability in order to have a blockchain with an immutable ledger in which, especially with Lightning technology, that you can move currency to each other in an instant with an unquestionable way. There's a reason that the Fed and the Chinese government and Russia and all these other people are adopting that tech. And I think that NFTs fall within that. Now, in terms of its current iteration, are there a ton of scammers? Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that the space is just absolutely rife with this. It kind of reminds me of the early period of monetary. People don't know this, but we didn't have a single tender currency in this country up until, what was it, 1865? It was like post-Civil War.
Yeah.
You had states which would issue its own legal tender, and then there were all sorts of scammers of people who were buying other states and buying bonds on other things, and there was a crazy boom and bust cycle. This goes back to the silver and the gold debates and the values of those things in the early 1900s. So I kind of look at it within that. There were a ton of scammers back then. It required a ton of regulation, social consensus. Ultimately, one had to win. So I just think that we're in that very early phase.
But the problem is that the whole idea of crypto is that we will never be constrained. We will never be regulated.
Well, the community
ultimately,
regulates. That's the whole point.
Ultimately, the promise of crypto has failed. That's the bottom line, because the whole idea of crypto was that this would serve as a stable medium of exchange. That just hasn't happened.
It's only been 12 years.
It's a speculative asset. In fact, the number of transactions and actual use of crypto to exchange goods and services has gone down. It really is just like a speculative, scammy thing to bet on at this point. And
so was the U.S. dollar 12 years after its inception. I mean, 12 years after 1776, it wasn't doing so.
The idea of the U.S. dollar wasn't, and we're always going to be total libertarian dreamland. And so that argues against if you came in with the same restrictions on crypto as we ultimately, the same backstops and, institutions that we put around the U.S. dollar, then that's a different deal. Also, crypto isn't the reserve currency of the most powerful nation on the planet. So, yeah, I mean, the thing that upsets me about it is that you have, once again, tale as old as time with our financial system. Big guys are going to be fine. The people who got in early, who made a bunch of money, and then the small guys got in later and were sold a bill of goods about how it would only go up, and this is the future, and this is your way to get in on the next big thing, and they are getting totally fucked. Yeah, and that's what upsets me.
I agree with you. I'm not going to call out any particular YouTubers or others, but let's just say that encouraging young men to pour their life savings into NFTs is egregious.
I mean, Madison Cawthorn
was terrible.
Pumping up the Let's Go Brandon
coin.
meme.
Yeah,
I mean, this is disgusting. The celebrities who are getting paid to pump this crap and have no knowledge, no interest in whether it's real or fake or anything else, but they're getting their payday. No, it's a cesspool. It really is.
I agree. Like Reese Witherspoon.
What are you doing? I mean, it's just gross. Like,
you don't have enough money
already.
Sweet Home Alabama didn't pay out enough. All right. Okay.
Okay. Next question.
Michael Ellie. Working from home, an offshore's dream. White-collar workers are fighting Elon Musk's edict to return to the office. If their job can be done from home, why not just hire workers from Bangalore, Guatemala City at a fraction of the price?
Well,
it's actually happening. So
yeah, I mean, that's definitely a real thing. What I would say is it's important for workers themselves to have a direct say in their workplaces through the form of a union, whether you're a blue collar or white collar worker, and then you'll be in a position to, negotiate the terms of whether you're in the office or out of the office, and whether you keep your job and what counts as just termination and all of those sorts of things. So listen, I mean, ultimately, these are all problems of allowing sole decision-making of the conditions of the workplace to be left up to the whims of one billionaire. We've seen this, I mean, with Elon specifically. Like, he's all over the place. I mean, he was like, we're going to cut 10% of the workforce, and then like 2 days later was like, actually, no, we're not. And he just added 45% to the whole thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm complicated. I do think a lot of these white-collar workers are just babies. I mean, a lot of them don't work that hard. And this is just based on from what I've seen in the tech space, like Apple and others. These people get paid enormous benefits, including cost of living adjustments, and they don't want to go in more than 2 days a week. And I think that the fairest critique, which is true, is that, hey, listen, the people who make the phones or make the cars all have been coming into work this entire time, and they work a hell of a lot harder. Yeah,
well, they also aren't mostly here. They're mostly in China getting paid the low wages and getting offshored and screwed.
Tesla workers, at least, predominantly are here. But I'm saying, yeah, I agree with that. Look, those people, work. I just think that it's very privileged from what I have seen of many of these white-collar workers who just don't want to commute. Now, listen, I don't blame you for wanting to do that.
I just want to see there to be fairness across the board. So I'm not looking to make the work experience shittier for white-collar workers just to, make it as bad as it is for blue-collar workers. I think also, if you think about like the housing market and putting pressure on these, having to be specifically in this environment. If people are able to work remotely, that sort of, spreads people more evenly across the country.
And
that
problems.
Can put,
these Californians are spreading across the country, bidding up prices for everybody.
Well, that is true because then you end up with these concentrations, these certain towns, like pricing out the
Austin,
locals is also another, that is
Idaho,
an issue as well. But my general interest is not in making white collar life shittier and making people more subject to like the boss's whims and having to have their butts in the chair from this time to that time. I don't really care if people like, I don't have like a fetish around you aren't working hard and you need to be there and the grind set, so to speak. So I personally am in favor of workers, whether they're white collar or blue collar or pink collar or service sector or whatever they are, having more freedom and autonomy in their workplaces. So that's
I will say, I do think it's important for women specifically work from home because I have seen reports that it actually increased the ability of people to have kids and to be able to work. So I was like, okay, well, that's actually
it's just a step away from having work being the only freaking thing in your life.
Yeah.
And it really has changed a lot of people's like orientation towards how they live and what they value and what they spend their time on. I think that's a good thing, and changing some of the cultural norms around that, I think ultimately is a positive direction.
Yeah.
Personally.
Okay, number 4.
Favorite documentaries from Matt Bjorklund. Krystal and Saagar, huge fan of the show. Thank you, Matt. I've been watching it since the early days of Rising.
Wow.
I'm just curious, what are some of your favorite documentaries from recent years that tackle important issues and ask important questions? Are there any that you feel are particularly relevant to the times we're living in now? You know what my favorite one? So I mentioned before I watched the 3 Mile Island one, which I do think
that was good. I watched it on your
Did you watch it? You liked it?
Good, yeah.
I mean, the corporate malfeasance part is
outrageous.
Just insane.
And the handling, the way they were lying to the government officials and stuff.
Yes.
That was crazy.
And we had no oversight.
Yeah, no oversight.
So it was just like...
The Pennsylvania governor was like, what's going on here? And I'm like, wait, dude, you should be in charge.
They were willing to risk the entire East Coast for profit. Right. And then they reapplied to let's reopen. And they're like, okay, what could go wrong? So anyway, yes, watch that one. The one I really loved though was Lula Rich. I think you watched that one. Oh yeah,
I love that doc. Yeah, it was
which
great
is about
it was on Amazon Prime.
Which is about the pyramid scheme of these LuLaRoe leggings. we have a largely male audience, so you guys probably have no idea what these things are.
I couldn't believe these are ugly as shit. I couldn't believe it.
They are so ugly.
Hideous.
All it is these leggings with these like obnoxious patterns on them. They are not flattering on anyone. But for some reason, they became this thing. And it's a multi-level marketing. That's sort of like the sanitized term for it. It's a pyramid scheme. And so eventually, like, I think at first there was a real product, people really responded to it, but then the whole thing became like Amway. It was just about getting more people in to sell the stuff. And it was, again, if you were, at the top of the pyramid, you were doing well, but everybody at the bottom was getting completely screwed. These moms were getting like bankrupted. They stopped making the leggings well, and they started to smell bad, and they started to like come apart, and people were stuck with their
they
inventory.
showed up like
It's just
moldy.
a total disaster. They'd open the bags and they'd smell like, disgusting and stink up their whole homes, and women lost everything to these to this mania. So anyway, it was not only relevant to this one particular weird brand of leggings, but it also, to a lot of aspects of our economy and the way that things are built. This actually ties back to the crypto and NFT conversation we were just having.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think the craziest point to that documentary was when people were buying shit on Facebook Live. Like, you remember that?
Oh, you're not.
When they were like
this is
holding.
This is a thing.
How is this possible?
There's so many.
Who are these people?
We also both listened to that podcast that was about all these different.
I told you about that.
Multi-level marketing.
Dream.
Yes,
great podcast.
Really good podcast, because they talked about there are so many of these different
MLMs.
things, and they really target women,
especially religious
stay-at-home moms, religious women in particular. These like essential oils and all these things. Yeah, those Facebook Lives where they'll show the products. That is a whole thing.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's very predatory.
I just cannot imagine being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna watch this guy's Facebook Live, and then I'm gonna buy some printed leggings. Listen,
but it's about it was about like the community.
I get it.
People felt like they were engaged in something. It felt like, on the way up when it's doing well, it's like, oh, I've got some pocket money and I'm making it and it's happening and I'm independent and I can do it on my own schedule. But then if you can't, keep up bringing people in, it became not even about selling the leggings, but just who you could scam into the same scam.
Totally, yeah, it was a great documentary.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say blanket, any American Experience. I love those. PBS American Experience, all on the history, all the presidents. It goes back over 40 years. You can go watch these great series, anything by Ken Burns. So pretty boring, conventional, but they're great. They're great docs. All right, last question. Robert Waros. Reason for high gas. What do you think gas prices are rising? Do you think gas company greed has anything to do with it? I'm shocked there is not more coverage on gas prices. Yeah, I agree. Considering how trickle gas prices have in our daily spendings, I see reports of large gas company profits. I see gas company stock soaring. I'm sure one of the policy changes from 2020 for gas companies was to raise prices. Okay, so we've obviously talked a lot about that. Is gas company greed have anything to do with it? Yes and no, because it's not just the company itself. It's actually Wall Street and the stock market investors. That's the biggest problem, which is that it's not just Exxon saying we are doing this solely to make more profit. They're doing so because their investors demand that they use those profits to pay them back in share dividends. So it's a very difficult corrective to have. That's actually part of the reason we should talk more about this. Why I think that bill misses the mark on corporate price gouging, because just cutting profits for gas companies would still not have the corrective in order to induce them in order to drill more, because it still would not stop the investor pressure that would be happening there. And it actually, frankly, it could reduce the amount of supply that we already have within gas. Something has to be done in order to correct the Wall Street imbalance and the company imbalance, and the government needs to step in. Ro Khanna was on our show talking about the SPR plan. I thought it was a great plan for the only time I've seen an elected official float anything in that. But there's a very nuanced, Matt Iglesias actually wrote a good piece on gas as well. I recommend people go and read that on his slow boring Substack. So anyway, that's what we got.
Yeah, it's the Putin price hike. That's
Putin price hike. It's actually, here's the thing about, this is what I don't get about Biden. People hate Wall Street. Call it the Wall Street price hike. It's actually a Wall Street price hike. It's true. Only 4% of our oil and gas came from Russia. It's not because of Putin. It's because Europe started buying it, and then there became a global scramble for all this gas, and then that caused, geopolitical crisis on top of a Wall Street crisis, on top of the, anyway, I could go on forever on this, but it's just like, it took me a couple of hours to figure this thing out and to be like, okay, this is probably 5 different things you could do to fix it, totally within the realm of political possibility. And it's me. This is the most powerful people on the planet.
Yeah.
And they can't do anything about it. Like,
Yeah.
that's the Jones Act thing I was telling you about. How crazy is that?
That was interesting.
How crazy is that has not been suspended? You could drop the price of gas by 20 cents. Listen, that's a lot of money for a lot of people, but whatever. I'm just talking. Okay.
All right, guys. Love you. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.